Welcome, everybody. My name is Mina Jane, and I'm the director of the Ashland Public Library. I'm really thrilled to be here with Rachael Cobb, who has talked with us several times before and is just one of my favorite people. And she brought along Ann Eldridge, who is just so motivational to me, so inspirational. So we'll be talking about grassroots movements, how to start your own, how to get involved in them. But before we get to that, I wanted to say thank you to the Friends of the Ashland Public Library who support all of our programming, as well as Rachael and Ann, who allowed us to share this program with probably about 20 Massachusetts and New Hampshire libraries. And for anybody who knows me, you know that when libraries work together, we make magic. So we are hoping for this amazing conversation today, and we're glad that you're here for it. So Rachael is a professor at Suffolk University in the government department and has talked extensively about voting rights, voting in the country in the last however many decades. I found her, I think, because she was on CNN or something. And I was like, oh my gosh, she's at Suffolk. So I had to reach out. So Rachael, welcome. Thank you so much for being here with us again. And Ann, thank you for jumping into this. I think we're going to have a fabulous conversation.
Well, good evening. Thank you so much, Mina. It is just such a pleasure to be here, and go libraries, my favorite places. So I'm delighted to be doing something with the libraries, and also delighted to be doing something with Ann. So I'm just going to provide a quick sneak peek at what we're going to do this evening, and then turn it over to Ann for some discussion. Today, we're going to give the story of grassroots organizing in Pennsylvania. Not in Philadelphia, actually, in Pennsylvania, and an organization that Ann founded called The Story of Massachusetts Flipping Pennsylvania. And then after that, I will do sort of some analysis of grassroots efforts and define what grassroots are, talk about voting rights, talk about what barriers there are to voting, who votes and who doesn't, and then effective strategies for mobilizing people to vote, especially in places where we don't see as much voting as we might hope for. So that is that, and my PowerPoint is not moving forward. So Ann, I'm going to turn it over to you and then try to get the PowerPoint to move.
Thank you, Rachael. I don't see myself yet, but I think I'll go. This is great. So here's a map of Pennsylvania, and you'll see that most of it looks very red, and it is very red. You see a blue area in the east. You see some blue in the west. That's mostly Allegheny County, where Pittsburgh is. And then you see what people in Pennsylvania call the T-zone, which is the whole middle of the state and right across the top, which is red, red, red. So fortunately for those of us who are progressives and Democrats, those red areas tend to be much less populated. And so we do manage to win elections. Joe Biden won Pennsylvania by 1.6 percentage points in 2020. So I'd like to talk a little bit about what my organization does and how we came into being. But I'd just start with a quote from Tip O'Neill, who was the congressman for where I live for many years, not before I lived here, but he was. And as you know, probably he always used to say, all politics are local. Well, local politics lead to local grassroots organizing. I grew up in New York State, and I lived in New York State for most of my life. I moved back to Cambridge 20 years ago. And because I'd been a political activist for a long, long time, I wanted to become active. Well, there isn't a heck of a lot to do in Massachusetts. Our whole congressional delegation is Democratic. So people in Massachusetts like to say that from our blue bubble, we go elsewhere. And before the pandemic, most of that going elsewhere actually meant physically getting in the car and driving to New Hampshire and going to door and to persuade people to vote for Democratic candidates, or sometimes going to Maine, or sometimes going farther afield. But and so in 2019, a group here, which was at that time called Swing Left Greater Boston, held a meeting in April of 2019 and invited a lot of people who had been doing this kind of stuff, like me, and wanted to talk about who would take the lead in the various swing states, organizing volunteers in Massachusetts to become active in this handful of swing states, which, as we all know, are the ones that determine our elections. It's too bad, but that's a fact. So you have to decide to try to have an impact there. And this was, of course, before the pandemic. And I thought that Pennsylvania was the closest of those swing states. It was a lot closer than Wisconsin or Michigan. And my oldest son happens to live in Philadelphia. So I raised my hand and said that I was interested in Pennsylvania. I didn't really know very much about Pennsylvania politics at that time. And another person who was there, his name is Bob Shire and lives in Swampscott, also raised his hand. And the two of us got together and we started talking about what we could do. And as we researched and talked to people and read things, we became convinced that the Lehigh Valley, which is one of those blue areas that you see there, mainly Lehigh and Northampton counties, was going to be the crucial area in Pennsylvania in the 2020 election, which turned out to be the case. But before that, even in 2019, we went and spent, I think, 6 days in the Lehigh Valley. The people there were very kind. They put us up. They will do this. Local people will, they'll give you a room and food, and they're glad to have you come. And we met a lot of the local people, and we became involved in really down ballot races, county commissioner races. And we wondered whether we would be able to persuade people in Cambridge, Massachusetts, or in Boston to make phone calls about county commissioners in Lehigh County, but we found out that we could. And Pennsylvania has 67 counties, and each of the county commissions are idiosyncratic. They're very different from one to another, and they have a lot of power. They set where the polling places will be. They decide whether there will be drop boxes where people can leave their mail-in ballots or not. They can set polling places for where there are colleges where they're far away and not convenient for the college students to vote, or they can do the reverse. And so we got involved in those races. And by golly, every Democrat who ran for political office in Lehigh County that year got elected, and they took control of the county commission for the first time since 1993, and they have maintained their control. So that was our first kind of, what shall I say, jump into the local politics. We met a lot of people. One of the person whom we were staying with arranged for us to have lunch with a whole bunch of local community leaders, and those relationships have prospered and they have expanded. So I want to just take a look at what I plan to say here. So then, of course, the pandemic happened. So everything changed. We thought in 2019, oh, this is great. It's so close. We'll be able to go there. We'll be able to canvass. And we did go there in 2019, but then everything shut down. And then we had to figure out how to do this all remotely. But we did relational organizing, we did networking, we were introduced by the people we had met there to other people. And we developed relationships not only with a lot of local area people, but also with some statewide organizations. Like there's a very, very good one called Turn PA Blue, which focuses on PA legislative races. But these people know Pennsylvania up, down, and sideways. They know every county, they know every legislative district, they know which ones are flippable and which ones are not. And they could advise us about the areas that would be most productive for us to go to. So gradually, we began to build these partnerships. We now have partnerships with, I think, 11 counties. And one thing that's quite interesting, too, is that these partnerships are varied. In some counties, it's the local Democratic Party. In other counties, the Democratic Party is pretty weak. Well, you would be too if you were living in a county that went 67% for Donald Trump. You would find yourself feeling very discouraged. You would feel very outnumbered, very isolated. And so in some of these counties, there are other groups like Indivisible Indivisible is a national organization that came into being after the 2016 election. It has groups, at least one group in every congressional district in the United States. In most congressional districts, there are several indivisible groups, and they are not directly affiliated with the Democratic Party, but they are progressive groups. And because of the fact that they are not affiliated with the party, they are able to reach a broader spectrum of people like independents. Independents are the fastest growing group of voters in Pennsylvania and throughout the country. So that's a very important role. So some of the groups that we are partners with are indivisible groups, some are Democratic parties, and some are just a bunch of people that got together. And one group, which is in Chester County is one of the so-called collar counties around Philadelphia. There are 4 of them. Some of them met on a bus going to the Women's March after the 2016 election, and now they have 1,500 people on their mailing list and a strategic plan for how they are going to get out the vote, how they're going to register voters, and so forth. So I want to keep my eye on the time here. So in addition to well, let's start with the fact that everyone recognizes that Pennsylvania, the Keystone State, is the key to national elections. I think everyone recognizes that it is not going to be possible for Joe Biden to be reelected without winning Pennsylvania. And I think it's also true that if he does win Pennsylvania, he will be reelected. So in addition to what I've already said, there are all kinds of national organizations that are focusing on Pennsylvania. And there is a monthly coordination call that takes place, which is run by a group called Lean Left Vermont. But it brings together usually almost 24 groups that are interested in Pennsylvania. Some of them are Pennsylvania groups. Some of them are national groups, like you may or not recognize these names: Field Team 6, Activate America, the Movement Voter Project, Force Multiplier. Many of these are groups that came into being after the election of Donald Trump, when everyone's hair was on fire. And so this is another part of the networking. This is where information is exchanged. People say we're doing this. Other people say we're doing that. People announce a fundraiser. Other people cooperate, and so forth. So there's a tremendous amount of information that gets exchanged. So what do these groups do, the local grassroots groups? Well, they do all the usual things. They do phone banks. They do text banks. They have newsletters. They have meetings. They have youth groups. They do voter registration. They do it in person, and they do it in other ways. They phone people and text them to remind them to ask for their mail-in ballot, which is something you have to do every year in Pennsylvania. You can't just say once, I want to receive a mail-in ballot, and get it forever. Then they follow up to see whether the person did apply for their mail-in ballot. And then later, when it gets close to the election, they do what's called ballot chasing. They call those people and say, we see that you asked for a mail-in ballot, but you haven't returned it yet. You know, the deadline is such. Here are the places where you can turn it in. And then as they get information about how those ballots have been returned, they are able to take those people off their list and not bother them again. And that's part of how we win elections. My co-lead and I went down to Delaware County for the election this past November. Delaware County people had reached out to us and asked how we could help. And so we went. And Bob Shire and I went out and we canvassed on a beautiful day in November for a young woman who was running for a town commissioner job. And I predict you're going to be seeing this young woman again. Her name is Annie Thorne, because she really is fantastic. And she was campaigning with her gorgeous 6-month-old son, Colin, on her chest. So he was in one of those, things that people wear. And she had taken it upon herself to go and talk to Republicans on who was going to shut their door in the face of this beautiful, blonde, blue-eyed little boy on his mom's chest. And Bob and I were going to talk to Democrats and independents. She won her race by 23 votes out of over 2,000 that were cast. I use that as an example of when people say my vote doesn't matter, I say, look at this. There are many, many races that are won by a handful of votes, a handful of votes. You know, Joe Biden won Pennsylvania by 1.6% of the votes. So these are the things that, you know, that keep me going. Right now, my group has been working on postcards to Erie County, Pennsylvania. Erie, if you looked at the map again, you would see a little blue thing up there in the far northwest corner of Pennsylvania on the Ohio border. That is Erie County. An article in U.S. News and World Report said that Erie County is the swingiest county in the entire United States. It also said you cannot win Pennsylvania without winning Erie County. So we have been distributing postcards for people to write to unregistered likely Democrats in Erie County. We have at this point, I think, distributed about 10,000 of those. And we hope that people will respond to this by registering, and then it will be the job of the folks in Erie County to make sure that these people vote. And so our role in this is getting people here to come and buy packets of postcards and sit down and write them or take them home. And the job of the people in Erie County or Carbon County or Lehigh County or any of these other counties is to follow up on this and make sure that this has the impact that we want it to. So I think I've said just about everything that I wanted to. Well, I know Rachel is going to talk about the fact that of who votes and who doesn't vote. So I'll just take a minute to talk about another little part of Pennsylvania, which is Allentown. Allentown is in Lehigh County. It's the third largest city in Pennsylvania, after only Philadelphia and Pittsburgh. It's a majority minority city, 54.5% Hispanic and 10% Black. And the voting turnout there is terrible. So in 2020, the voting turnout for the state of Pennsylvania, I think, was something like 76.5%. And in Allentown, it was 54.6%. So this is obviously presents a real challenge for Lehigh County, for the city of Allentown, for an Hispanic organization that's there that's called Make the Road Pennsylvania, which has deep roots within the community, to turn this around, to raise the turnout, because these voters are Democrats. If they vote, they will vote blue. So it's a big challenge ahead of all of us. I just, for whatever reason, I am a person who feels that, it's my job to try to make the world better than I found it. And so this is the kind of work that I do that makes me feel that perhaps I'm, having a beneficial effect on saving our democracy.
Well, thank you, Anne, for sharing the story of Pennsylvania and of your work there. And I am going to now sort of take this and talk about some of the key things that Anne talked about, but put it into some broader context, because when we talk about grassroots, there are so many words that Anne just used that are so important for us to think about when we think about grassroots organizing. And this is organizing that is done by groups across the United States and done by groups of all parties, done by groups who are trying to do many different things, whether it is focused on the environment, whether it's focused on education, whether it's focused on safe streets or any other thing. These are the buzzwords that you used: groups, relationships, cooperating, connecting, networking, strategy, focusing in on key organizations and groups that are going to make the difference. So what are grassroots efforts? And I think, I'll basically know what it is, but I always think it's good to begin any presentation to just make sure that we understand our terms. It is using collective action at the local level to implement change at the local, regional, or international levels. So you can do grassroots and make change at the international. You can do grassroots and make change at the local. And one of the things that technology has enabled many of us to do is to make change in places that are far corners of the earth, even from our places outside. But one of the things that we need to do is make sure that we have those deep connections to the people on the ground so that we are understanding what the key issues are on the ground there. So I'll go back now. What are voting rights? Well, when we talk about voting, we are talking about facilitating participation in American democracy and making voting easier by reducing the barriers when we're talking about rights. And when we're talking about sort of the opposite of rights, we're talking about contracting voting rights and making it harder by increasing the barriers. So one of the things that political scientists like to do is take a look at the examples of expansion and contraction and see what kinds of policies are making it easier for people to participate when they are connected at the grassroots, and what kinds of policies are making it more difficult. So we'll begin with the more difficult examples of how can we reduce voting rights. Well, we can make it more difficult to register. We can lengthen the time it takes to register. So instead of registering on the day of the election, you could make it 10 days or 20 days. The maximum is 30 days. We can lengthen the distance that people need to travel to get to their polling location. So we make it more difficult for them to get to their voting place. And we can reduce the available modalities for voting. We have, over the last 20 years or so, increased the modalities for voting. We've created more vote by mail opportunities. We've created early voting centers. We've created voting centers in general, and done all kinds of things to do that. But we could say, we're going to just take back some of those. And finally, we can do the opposite and expand. And we can do this by creating policies such as same-day registration in a state, and 20 states currently have this. We can have automatic voter registration so that when you go to your local registry of motor vehicles to get your driver's license, you are automatically registered to vote at that same time. So it's taking a multi-step process and reducing the steps, and it is also taking the opportunity to opt out, which is more difficult than opting in. So you're automatically in, and you have to actually more proactively opt out. The other thing we can do is expand early voting opportunities and offer these multiple modalities for voting by mail, no excuse absentee. So I'd say this to say that if we're thinking about voting rights in the United States and things that we can do to make a difference and pave the way to make life easier for people to vote, these are the kinds of policies that we would talk to our state legislators about to alter, so that at least that piece of it is easier. Now, let's look at sort of the landscape of the United States and divide it into the two places in the United States: the turnout oases and the turnout deserts. Michael Barber at Brigham Young and John Holbein at the University of Virginia examined the voter files instead of survey data to analyze voting patterns in the United States. And they took a snapshot of over 200 million individuals in a single year. And they were able to look at voting history, age, gender, race, location, and political party. And I think the results are not surprising, but they put it into such stark contrast, and said that what they found is that there are what they call turnout deserts across the United States, where people just are not voting. And Anne alluded to some of these. There are areas with comparatively few people voting, And there are many areas across the United States that have significant turnout deserts. Not surprisingly, this has to do with racial disparities. So there are Black, Hispanic, and Asian individuals are more likely to live in turnout deserts than white Americans. And one of the things that we know about so many activities in life is that things like voting is a social activity. So that if the people around you are voting, then your knowledge of voting, those discussions, those kind of just informal things that are the lubricant that make your access to voting and your understanding of it easier. If you live in a turnout desert, then you are not having those social experiences that are going to encourage it. And so that sort of vicious cycle of less turnout begets less turnout exists. There is also political disparities in turnout deserts. Democrats are 2.5 times more likely to reside in a turnout desert than Republicans, indicating a political disparity in voting patterns across the United States. There's also social stratification and political inequality. Turnout deserts are suggested to be socially stratified and self-reinforcing and perpetuate political inequality in the United States. And finally, there are age disparities. Actually, not finally, I have 2 more points, but age disparities in turnout deserts. Young people are significantly more likely to live in turnout deserts than older citizens. And citizens over 60 vote at a rate 40 percentage points higher than those aged 30 or younger. And we can talk about some of that in the Q&A. But finally, there's a geographic distribution of turnout deserts, emphasizing the widespread nature of it across different regions. And this has implications for our understanding and addressing of voting disparities. So after the Depression, let's talk about what we can do to mobilize voters. And many of the strategies that are emphasized by Anne and by others who are engaged in grassroots efforts, regardless of political party or area, that personal contact is central to what makes grassroots effective. And that's what gives, I don't know, gives it the special sauce that really no other effort has. That direct personal contact with a potential voter is highly effective. Door-to-door canvassing, phone calls have a significant impact on voter mobilization. Face-to-face interactions are also hugely important. When you go canvassing, you have a stronger mobilization effect compared to other forms of communication. And then there are that targeting and strategy to go after the people who we might call marginal voters. Any mobilization effort should focus in on the individuals who are less likely to vote without encouragement. And I want to pause here and say that this is the difference between the grassroots efforts and the efforts of campaigns, because campaigns are organizations that by their very nature have scarce resources. And what they are interested in doing is mobilizing the already mobilized. They want to make sure that their voters turn out. They are not that interested in people who don't have a history of voting, because who knows whether they're actually going to vote or not. So if you're wearing your campaign strategy hat and you're trying to get somebody elected, your number one strategy is not going to be, hey, go after all those people who aren't voting. It will be make sure you get the people who already have voted and we know are voters, and make sure that they vote for you. So the difference then for people who are just encouraging people to participate and invite them to the table of American democracy is mobilizing the people and helping them and encouraging them and educating them to vote, and not focus as much on what the campaigns are doing. The other thing I'll say about campaigns is that who are they sending their literature to? They're sending their literature to the people who are on the voter list. If the people are not on the voter list because they haven't voted, then they're not going to get contact from campaigns. So that's another way in which voters, or people who are potential voters but who have not yet voted, are sort of left out of the process because they're not getting that material. And then there's the timing. Timing is so critical to all of this. It's so obvious, but it's worth saying that, of course, the closer we get to election day, the more substantial effect you'll have on voter turnout. You can do a lot of stuff in July, but telling people to vote in July when the election is in November is not going to have as much impact as telling people to vote in October, all the way up to election day. But that's part of why these registration rules are a piece of this puzzle, because if you have to register to vote 30 days before an election, and people have not even really cottoned on to the fact that there's an election going on in November because the excitement hasn't built yet. And this is especially true in off-year elections and in midterm elections. Those are just much more low salience. And if you're not in the circles that are talking about elections all the time, that kind of just knowledge of there being an election it starts to come with a force that happens during the month of October, but not really before. And then finally, social pressure is key to all of this. As I've alluded to as already, these groups and these networks are central to people feeling like they want to vote because people like them and their peers are voting. Informing individuals that their voting behavior will be observed by others can also be a powerful motivator. So some of the strategies that we've already talked about of saying, hey, you didn't, are we sure that you are going to mail back your ballot, etc. That kind of knowledge that people are watching can be very, very important. And then finally, get out the vote efforts, including reminders and assistance with the voting process, can increase turnout. And the voting process in the United States, it has, as I've already mentioned, so many different modalities. And it is frankly quite confusing, especially if people are moving from one state to another. So those are centrally important to make sure that there's a lot of information that is accurate. And of course, we're up against misinformation and disinformation and all kinds of things that are hurting our ability to get accurate, clear information out to people. And community-based organizations are also key. It is the communities and the social networks that are influential, encouraging voter participation. Having outside consultants does not make the difference to what the on the ground knowledge that groups there have. And so we must rely on the knowledge, the rich knowledge that people on the ground have. Finally, consistent and targeted messages that resonate with the audience are crucial for mobilization success. Actually, I think I've said finally a few times, not quite done, so I'm going to say finally a couple more times. Incentives and motivations to highlight personal benefits of voting can enhance mobilization efforts. And one of the other things is voting begets voting. So once, as we can call it like a gateway drug, once you've voted once, your propensity to vote increases. And part of that is because you kind of become part of this group, but also because you've done it once and realized that it was something that you could actually do again. And so those hurdles become lower for you in that kind of psychological way. Still using technology, leveraging it, such as personalized messages through social media, text messages, are very effective for voter mobilization. And finally, I do think I have two more points that are related. Building strength in numbers. More people, more organizations. The more people we have that belong to more organizations, the more we can connect those people and those organizations to provide that clear, accurate information that helps people make their decisions in the voting process. And people feeling not alone, more willing to advocate and believe something is possible. With more people, we have more hope. We know that when we show up to something and nobody else is there, we think, oh my gosh, I guess I'm the one who is doing this that nobody else wants to. When we show up and there are a lot of people, we say, hey, I guess a lot of people believe what I believe. So organizing, resources, people, skills, connections are all central. this talk so far has focused on the grassroots efforts. And so the question, I think, for all of you is, where does change come from? Does it come from the top down or the bottom up? I would say, as an academic, I would say both are true. But today we've really focused on what happens from the bottom up, because it is really, truly only from the bottom up that we can get the top to have the pressure that it needs to make the change from there. So I will stop my slideshow there, and we are right on time, and open it up to Q&A.
That was amazing. Thank you so much, both of you, Anne and Rachel. I think we've all learned a lot. I'm curious, and I want to remind people to put their questions in the Q&A so that we can I can pull from there for this portion of the talk. But Anne, you had said something that earlier on that I don't think a lot of people understand, and I certainly don't, is why is Pennsylvania the key? Why is it? I mean, like when the framers decided on the Constitution, how did it happen that now one state can really decide, make or break a president?
Well, I don't think the framers really had any idea about it, but Pennsylvania has 19 electoral votes, and it is also pretty swingy. That's really the issue. That and for example, when I talked about Erie County and said that it was described as the swingiest county in the country, there have been 25 statewide elections in Pennsylvania since 2008. I mean, when I say statewide, it would be for senator, for governor, for attorney general. And Erie County has picked the winner 23 out of 25 times. I don't know how those balloons happened, but anyway. So this goes to show that this is why people say you can't win Pennsylvania without winning Erie County. It just seems to have an uncanny ability to be with the winner, and Pennsylvania does too. And if you look at sites like 538.com, you will see they always have a model which shows which state is liable to be a turning point state. And typically Pennsylvania is there because you have states that are going to be blue: Pennsylvania, New York, Massachusetts, and you have states that are going to be red: Kansas, Oklahoma, whatever, and Georgia probably. And so there's this tiny little group of states that can be red or they could be blue. That's why they're called swing states. And Pennsylvania seems to be the one that determines that they are the tipping point state. And it is a diverse state and an evolving state. The demographics are definitely changing. For example, in the northeast corner of the state, which is where we have been really focusing quite a lot since starting with the election of 2022, there is a big influx of Hispanic people from the New York area, for example, New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, because there are jobs there. There are a lot of jobs. There's industry is growing. Also, the health professions employ a lot of people there. And it's located in such a way that things like Walmart and Target and so forth have built big distribution centers there. It's very easy to connect the transportation here, there, and everywhere. And so these people are moving there because there are jobs, and housing is so much less expensive than in the New York area. So this is one of the interesting challenges for grassroots groups to somehow build their competency in working with these new populations of voters. And that is changing the demographics. And of course, aging is changing the demographics and so forth.
Well, so that brings me to a question that somebody had asked, and then it's actually, I don't see it anymore. But how do these, how do people in like Pennsylvania, let's say, feel about somebody in Massachusetts, calling and saying, hey, you should really vote for blah, 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 because, and they're like, well, you have no skin in my game because you don't live here.
Well, there are a couple of there are a couple of answers to how to get around that, you might say. One is there's something called Google Voice. You can get a telephone number. I have a Google Voice number, which is a 610 area code, and that is in Pennsylvania. So if I call people with my Google Voice number, they don't see the 617 number, which is my mobile phone. Or if you are using on a phone bank, which has something called directed predictive dialing, which does the dialing for you, the number that people see has nothing to do. You're not using your own phone, so they are not seeing that. But I will say that I have had the experience of using my own phone, and which is the other kind of phone bank, and mostly people are not hostile about that. Every once in a while, yes, but mostly not. And if they do ask me, why are you doing this? I tell the truth. I say, because doing this here is not necessary. So I'm trying to reach out to a place where I can make a difference, and they accept that.
That's a curious thing, though, because when they had the Georgia runoff and the intensity of the movement of Stacey Abrams and all of that, people were sick of it. And I think does that make a difference in voter turnout? Do they get so sick of it they're like, you know what, I don't even want to have anything to do with this?
Well, I will say that in the election in Maine, when Susan Collins was running for re-election 2 years ago, people in Massachusetts, a lot of people in Massachusetts really became involved in that election. And not only were they phoning, but they were going up there and, renting a house and staying for a month. And there is some evidence that that had a negative backlash, because Mainers do not like people from away coming in and telling them what to do. So yes, there is the possibility of having it be perceived negatively. Have to be aware of that.
I also think there is that issue of too much. And one of the things that we talk about in political science is voter fatigue, that we have so many elections in the United States for so many things that it is overwhelming. And this year, if in Massachusetts, at least, we're going to have 3 big elections. There's Super Tuesday, the presidential primary, then there's the Massachusetts primary, and then there's the general election. That's a lot of elections. And it's, in the first round, it's just one candidate, but then we get to other candidates and down ballot offices. It's a lot of information for voters to keep track of. So there's that. And then if you put on top of that the inundation of texting and phone calling, and I know many people who do get very annoyed. So it's this really difficult dance of making sure that there's contact, because there are a lot of people who feel abandoned, and then there's too much contact and of the people who you really need, but are just like, I've had it, I'm not doing it. So where do you walk that line? And of course, we can control what we do, but we cannot control all of the other information that is flying at everyone. And I think all of us feel wiped out just by looking at our inboxes.
And yes, that's a very good point, because there are rules that prohibit organizations from coordinating in what they are doing. So it is quite common to have someone say, I have received so many phone calls, and if you don't stop doing this, I'm not going to vote. And you have to say, well, I can't, please take me off your list. And you have to say, well, I will try to do that, but I can't guarantee that you won't be called by somebody else, because we are not allowed to share that information. And we're not allowed to say, okay, I'm calling you from this thing, but somebody may call you from an environmentally focused, a climate focused group, or they may call you from some other group. And we can't control that.
So would you say that the most powerful, or one of the most powerful tools, is to be somebody who's doing a grassroots movement in the community in which they live?
There's absolutely no question about that. That is the most powerful thing. And the most powerful thing is what's called relational organizing, which is people talking to their own friends and their own family and just, spreading the message in that way. There's really nothing that can compare with that. And I tried to put a link in the chat. We have a newsletter called the Rural Reporter. I had to say, if you go to our website, you can find it there because I couldn't manage to do it. But the Bob Shire, my co-leader, did a wonderful interview with a woman in Wayne County. Wayne County is the next one west from Pike. It's in Pennsylvania, Congressional District number 8. And she talked about the fact that, yes, we may differ here on our political points of view, but we are part of a community. And when our cows got out, our neighbor, who is a MAGA Republican, rounded those cows up and put them in his pen until we could get control of them and bring them back where they belonged. So we are human beings. We live here. Our children go to school here, and those bonds transcend, often, not always, but they can transcend the political differences, and they can also eventually sometimes lead people to change their mind. I mean, when they see that, you're not somebody with horns and a tail just because you say that you're a Democrat or you say that you're a Republican, then that can change people's minds.
Mm-hmm. I think one of the questions that we always get in these kind of things is, how do we get younger voters to be more involved? And I actually, maybe Twitter's not the best place to see this, but it feels like young people are more involved than ever.
Yeah, I would mention one of the chair of one of the Democratic Party in one of the counties we work with, Schuylkill County, came up with a brilliant idea. He's the kind of guy who wakes up in the morning and thinks, what 5 projects can I start today? But anyway, he's great. He gets information on a regular basis about students in the schools who've turned 18, and he sends them a personal letter with a business card that has a QR code on it and asks them to become high school ambassadors and persuade their peers to register to vote. So that's one strategy. There are national organizations that are focusing on the youth vote and trying to persuade. And of course, Taylor Swift said, told people they should vote, and voila, 35,000 people turned around and registered to vote. So
I think
there are lots of ways of getting at this, but I agree. On the other hand, the participation of young voters in the last few elections has been stronger, and Rachel, I'm sure, would have the data on that, than for many years in the past. And there's no question that that the Dobbs decision had a big role in that.
Mm-hmm.
It has shot up. But I actually
and of course, climate also. I would say
Yeah.
that's also a huge issue for young voters.
I want to say a couple of things about this. One is that the excellent idea of the turning 18 thing, and I'm sure I've said this before, but it struck me when I had, and when I think, Nina, I think I have said this before. When I had my first baby here in Cambridge, Massachusetts, I got a book. I got a bag from the library, and it said Born to Read, and there were a bunch of books in there and some information about how to be a mom or how to be a parent and how to engage my child in reading and the library. And first of all, it was really special, and it was really wonderful to get that. And the library services for young parents are truly wonderful. But it did get me thinking about this important life passage and the engagement that a community organization had with me at that moment. And I thought, wow, how wonderful would it be if every time somebody turned 18, they got some sort of gift that said, welcome to being a full citizen, and welcome to this world. And we are here to educate you and help guide you and not shame you, because I actually find that and I'll just say it, politicians, often I see them in front of my students and I see them shaming them and saying, well, you don't vote. Well, It's really not that easy to figure all of this out. The registration, how do you even know to register to vote if you're not around a bunch of people who register to vote and tell you how to do that? If your high school hasn't taught you civics, if your family is not doing this, how do you know this? I am a political scientist. I Google things all the time, and let me tell you, it is hard for me to get basic information about how to do these things in various places. So if
Well,
it is,
and of course, a big help now, and this was something that's just introduced in Pennsylvania, which we have in Massachusetts, is the automatic voter registration when you get a
right,
driver's license.
right, and pre-registration
Yes,
for
and it
17.
also, I learned recently, it also applies when you renew your license. So if you, which is great because that means that then if you moved, you're
Yeah,
going to be registered at your new address. So if when you renew
right.
your license, if you have a different address, you will be registered at that address. So
And
that's
again,
that's a
all of these
great
rules,
thing.
if you move, you have to re-register. If you do this, you have to do that. There's any, when you're moving, it's like that voting is not necessarily the top of your mind thing that you're thinking about. So all of these things conspire, I would say, to make the barriers for young people high. And I also always just remind people that, our young people are still developing their executive functioning skills. So that is something that we also just need to be aware of and nurture as they walk into this. So we've made it hard on them, and so how do we get young people to do it? We first of all treat them respectfully, and we honor their and invite them to participation. I just think some of these basic emotional ways of connecting with our young people and not making them feel bad for their age.
Mhm.
But also, I mean, there's certainly embedded in a lot of what I've said, there are some policy decisions that we could make to make it easier for young people. And then, of course, there's the education piece, which we do have civics. It's a growing movement, but some of that just basic words and phrases that we are the lingo and the lingo of democracy are super important to inculcate in young people early on.
Mhm.
I see three questions in the
Yep.
Q&A that
Yep.
I
I'm gonna.
would like to touch on very quickly in the time we have left. So one person said that he thought that using a Google phone number seems sneaky and dishonest. Well, I don't really agree with that because um, it's simply there's a barrier that people would more likely to answer the phone if they see a local phone number, but then you have to make your argument however it is that you're going to do, and so that doesn't bother me. Another question was about the disappearance of local information, and that is really a big problem. Every week in this country, 2.5 local newspapers go out of business. And so in the rural areas where we've been putting a lot of emphasis recently, the access to news is really very limited, and most of it is just either broadcast news or talk radio. And talk radio, well, I won't say anything more about talk radio, but it has, I think it has a very negative effect. And what was the third one? Now I don't see.
Do you have data about the efficacy
Oh,
of
yes,
postcards and
efficacy.
letters?
Okay, so very quickly, there of the four things that people can do, starting with canvassing, going door to door is definitely, everyone thinks, is the most effective. The next most effective is phone banking. The next after that is texting, and postcards and letters are at the bottom of the list, but they do have a demonstrable effect. And the reality is that that list is in the inverse order of the willingness of volunteers to do things. So
Mm.
they are most willing to write a postcard because they don't have to have any personal contact with anybody, then texting because they don't have to talk to them, then phone banking because they do have to talk to them, and then the thing that they're least willing to do is to go door to door because this is a face-to-face conversation with someone. And
Mhm.
so of course you have to put on your walking shoes and cover a lot of ground. But So you you have to work with what you have, and if people are willing to write postcards, we do have evidence that they have some measurable effect, probably somewhere between 1% and 2% increase in the propensity of people to vote. But that can make a difference, as with my story about Annie Thorne, who won with 23 votes out of 2,000, that were cast. So 1% can make a big difference.
Mm-hmm. And just as a last question, actually, Nancy had written that our state rep won by 1 vote. So every
Here
vote,
you
yeah.
are.
Yeah.
Yeah. And sometimes they've had the coin toss when it's a tie.
That doesn't seem very fair. So because of the demise of papers and young people, I don't read a newspaper for sure, and I'm not that young. But what is the best tool to tell people about candidates? Something that they will actually read, something that's or look at or whatever. What is the best tool that you found?
Boy, that's a good question. I mean, of course, the best tool is for someone that they know and trust to tell them about the person.
Mm-hmm.
That's the gold standard. But beyond that, I mean, we all still do the things we've always been doing. We go around and we leave literature on people's porches, and they may or may not read it. Social media, I mean, absolutely. In 2022, our group raised $45,000 for print, radio, and social media, digital media ads for 2 congressional candidates in Pennsylvania. And the radio ads ran on talk radio.
Mm.
They were for Matt Cartwright, who is the congressman in PA8, and he was one of the leaders in the development and passage of the Burn Act, which benefited veterans who had been harmed by burn pits.
Mm-hmm.
So, and he has had for years a very strong record of supporting actions that benefit veterans. So running that ad on talk radio was liable to reach a lot of people for whom it would be relevant. But social media, Facebook, not so much with young people, that's considered to be, for people like us. But Twitter, X, TikTok, especially young people many of them are just voracious consumers of TikTok and Instagram. And it is interesting and to me appalling that many people say that this is where they get their news, from
Mm-hmm.
social media.
That's what most of my students do.
So you really
Yeah.
have to be there.
Right. We have to be there. Voter guides. I mean, what I would say to that question is a lot of different sources, which does I fully understand that I am now making it more difficult and putting the cognitive load on people. But triangulating information from trusted sources, and especially when nonpartisan groups are putting out voter guides, or the local election commission is putting out voter guides, that's a really great way. And then, if anybody wants to start a little podcast in their local area and interview all of the candidates for 5 to 20 minutes, we had that here in Cambridge, where Jimmy Tingle, our local comedian, interviewed every single school committee candidate. And I listened to each and every one. It was hugely helpful.
I did. Yeah.
So little things like that. I mean, that's a big thing. He takes a lot of time doing that, and thank you for doing that. But things like that can make, that again, personal contact, that connection, and the podcasts that a lot of us are using all the time. Things that save people time, but also provide them with solid, well-rounded information.
Yes, and someone else asked, and now that I remember it, is that he or she had read that it takes 5 what are called touches to persuade somebody to do something. That is the sort of, that's the mantra. That's what people say. So one does try, at the risk of irritating people, one does try to send a postcard and then make a phone call and then send a text and then show up at their door, because it is true that multiple contacts have an accumulating effect, and we all know that.
And the work is too important to not do. We just have to find the right tools. I think, Rachel, you wanted to answer this last or comment on this last
I
question.
wanted to say go go Dorothy for sending out that birthday card registration information. That is the kind of grassroots thing. And I tell you, I bet some of those 18-year-olds, if not all of them, are going to remember that for the rest of their lives. Those are just transformative kinds of events in people's lives to say that they got that and that they were noted and special in that way.
I just want to read the comment so that everybody knows it because they can't always see it. I send out birthday card registration information to the students who will be 18 in each year in our Tri-County area for the League of Women Voters. So yes, it's lovely and so thoughtful and forward thinking and the exact sort of touch that I think people really appreciate, as you said, Rachel. Thank you so much for doing this. We have recorded it and I will send out a link for anybody who came in late or had to step out for a minute. But if you have any follow-up questions or thoughts, feel free to just email me and I will connect you with Rachel or Anne, because I think that what they do is extraordinarily important. Teaching our young and supporting our elections and our democracy are, there's just nothing in some ways more important right now. So thank you so much for taking the time to educate us and be with us. And I hope that the work that you do just continues on in a very positive way.
Thank you for the opportunity. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. I'll be in touch with you,
Glad
Rachel,
to
again.
answer any questions that anybody wants to throw my way.
Okay, great. I will put the link to your organization in my recap email, and so everybody can find it.
So much. Okay.
All right. Good night, everybody.
Night. Bye-bye.
Good night.